But in a situation where you find that a person look like the same,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, it's Daybreak on Trust Television, and it's that segment where we bring you all the stories that made it to the front pages of the national newspapers we have in the studio this morning. And as usual, we will begin with the Daily Trust. And the major story here reads, after selling 649 vehicles, EFCC auctioned 160 houses, lands worth billions of naira. With the riders Desiani, ex-NIA DG houses, others up for grab. Government agencies, others to enjoy rights of first refusal, whatever that means. Expert comment decision, advocate due process. We will announce revenue from sales soon, spokesman. You'll find the details of this story if you get today's Daily Trust and open to page 4. We have one of the pictures of the forfeited properties there, very large and palatial expanse of real estate there on offer. We hope, like Z was telling me somewhere behind the cameras, that these houses are not sold far less than what the market values will be in return. That will be an indirect way of relooting what was recovered. If you add the cost of recovering this and the cost of personnel, that would amount to an exercise in futility, I guess. And to other stories on the front page, exploring 6th century old link between Kano and Algerian scholar El Magali. You would find this story on page 3 of the Daily Trust. I am fed up with my marriage, Ganduje's daughter tells court. And reps to ASU, Gbajabia Mila didn't deceive you. And to other stories, National Assembly raises 2023 budget by 1.3 trillion. I hope this doesn't stand in the way of the passage before the end of the year. Fiscal activities that shaped Nigeria's economy in 2022. You want to know what they are? You open to page 20 of the Daily Trust. Nigerian refugees turned taxi drivers sacked from Niger Republic. You'll find that story on page 30. And bandit kill 14, adopt 81 in Sokoto and Katsina. And to other highlights there on the front page. Still in captivity, 11 schoolgirls of FGC Brini Yauri have spent 562 days in captivity. And we have one student of the Bethel Baptist High School, Kujama, who has also spent 534 days in captivity. These are the major stories that made it to the front page of the Daily Trust.
Okay, let's take a look at some more stories on the Leadership newspaper this morning. The Leadership newspaper is leading with a story about amid rising deficit debts, NAS increases 2023 budget by 1.3 trillion. That story is on page 4. And then 2023 G5 governors weigh Tinubu Obi options. That story is on page 7. Raises budget from 20.5 trillion to 21.8 trillion. Nigeria's debt profile may hit 70 trillion next year. The Senate is also saying in a rowdy session over Buhari's 22.7 trillion request, asks CBN to extend deadline for old Naira notes to June. You'd find other interesting stories as well on the Leadership newspaper this morning. Right at the top, Lagos lawyer, IGP orders killer policeman suspension. You read that story on page 6. And then the story that seems to be making headway in almost all the dailies this morning is about the auction. EFCC invites bids for 61 forfeited houses. Others, you can read up that story on page 10. And then on page 19 on the Leadership newspaper, gunmen bomb police headquarters in Anambra. 3 suspects. 19 die in 2 Niger road crashes. And then you see the story about Ohanese President General Obiozo dies at 60. These are the major highlights on the Leadership.
Moving on to the Daily Times, and the major stories there is with regards to the 2023 election. Again, Buhari warns security agencies to maintain professionalism, urges them to desist from behavior that could bring disrepute to their organization, Nigeria. You'll find the president there alongside with the Minister of Defense, General Bashir Magashi, and at the commissioning of the staff quarters of the Defense Intelligence Agency at the Idu Karimu, Abuja, yesterday. The picture credit there is to the State House. And moving on to other stories, National Assembly passes 21.8 trillion 2023 budget. And to other stories, Bolanle Rahim commit an offense, pay dearly for it, force warns police officers. And to other stories, withdrawal limit, extend policy to June 30, 2023, Senate appeals to the Central Bank. 2023, Obasanjo fully backing Obi dirty campaign, says Oshitoku. And Ohanaeze Ndigbo President George Obiozor is dead. Buhari requests restructuring of 22.7 trillion ways and means advances tears Senates apart. And I think these are the major stories, of course, as we have on the front page of the Daily Times this morning.
Okay, quickly now, before we take a look at a detailed review of some of the stories. On this Nigeria this morning, amid uproar, Senate steps down Buhari's 23.7 trillion request. Lawmakers argue ways and means advances not known to Constitution. And you see also domestic debt hits 22 trillion as NAS approves 819.54 billion supplementary budget. You'll see also on page 5 the story about the Naira redesign. Senate urges CBN to start implementation June 30th next year. And then security agents arrest 780 suspects, rescue 206 kidnapped victims in Kaduna. And you see also another story on this Nigeria. Bolale, IGP orders suspension of errant policemen. Rep seeks ban of alcohol consumption by police. These are the major highlights on this Nigeria.
And moving on to First News this morning, we have as the major story, commotion in Senate over Buhari's 23.7 trillion extra budgetary spending request. As senators oppose, suspend strange ways and means expenditure request, passes 819 trillion supplementary budget as debt rises, and Senate extend 2022 budget implementation to March 2023, adjourns plenary to January 17th. And to other stories, 2023, it will be shameful for Buhari to hand over power to opposition, APC chairman. And Jagaban's army, children of Buhari Oshibajo included in APC Youth Campaign Council. And to other stories, Tinubu healthy, intellectually fit to rule Nigeria. National Assembly passes 2023 budget of 21.8 trillion. Reps tackle ASU president over deception allegation against Gbajabia Miller. And Wike killed Igbo 2023 presidency Ohanaeze youth. Confusion, anxiety over Ohanaeze Ndigbo's President General Obiozor. Why I accepted Obi's campaign DJ appointment, Oshitoku. Old Naira note, Senate asks CBN to extend deadline to June. And slain Lagos lawyer, IGP suspends killer officer. To other story right beside the nameplates there, we have 2023 fresh crisis hits Labour Party over ZLP senatorial candidate Oshitoku's appointment as Obi campaign DG. National Assembly to spend 30 billion on severance allowance, inauguration of lawmakers. And 2023, Buhari charges security agencies to remain apolitical, says I am very difficult to satisfy. These are the major stories on the front page of First News this morning.
On the Nigerian News Direct, confusion in Senate over repayment of 23.7 trillion CBN loan as NAS passes 2023 appropriation bill, raises budget by 1.31 trillion. Works and infrastructure, defense, education, health get lion's share. And then Senate approves Buhari's 819.5 billion supplementary budget request for 2022. You'd find other stories as well on the Nigerian News Direct. Omobolale Rahim, IGP orders suspension of Officer Vandi. And then Dangote Refinery awards scholarship to 460 students in host communities. You'd find another story that talks about reps want NNPC to suspend sale of oil mining license. Auction, EFCC invites bids for forfeited properties across the country. And then you see also another story that talks about 5 outstanding developments that defined Nigeria's capital market in 2022. For details of that, you can grab a copy of the Nigerian News Direct this morning.
And now to the Blueprint newspaper. We have as the major headline, how 2023 polls, census, others cause increase in budget size. Appropriation bid rises by 1.3 trillion as NAS okays 21.82 trillion. Army, Navy, Nigerian Police Force, Agric, Health, Aviation, Science, and Tech also beneficiaries. 22.7 trillion ways and means advances cause uproar in Senate, and Buhari lawmakers extend 2022 budget implementations to March 2023. And to other stories there, gunmen bomb police facilities in Anambra, set inmates free. Troop parade suspected IPOB commander who killed Gulak. Operatives kill 21 terrorists, arrest 780 in Kaduna, rescue 206 victims. You find that on page 8. And hoodlums slay one, set 10 houses ablaze in Enugu community. And to other stories on the front page, 2023 tests for currency regime stability, according to experts. And to other stories, IMF advocate better regulation of Africa's crypto market. Naira redesign, Senate urges CBN to extend deadline to June 30. 2023, PDP chieftain assassinated, many others injured in Oyo. And credit to Nigerian economy surges to 64.2 trillion in November. These are the major stories on the front page of Blueprint newspaper this morning. And at this point, we will be looking at the details of the stories that made it to the front pages of the newspaper. And we now have in the studio joining us Mr. Kunle Adeni, the public commentator, who will be looking at the headlines of the pages of the newspaper for us this morning. It's a pleasure to have you in the studio, Mr. Kunle.
It's a pleasure as well.
Thank you. Yesterday, the biggest story in the land clearly was the story of the passage of the budget, which was, of course, increased by 1.3 trillion. And as most of the papers reported, there were uproar over the president's request on the restructuring of the ways and means. Clearly, a provision that is against even the CBN Act that states that we are unable to do this. We will be reacting to this and many more when we return from this quick break. Please stay with us.
Where you find that they must look like the same.
Not necessarily tribal or regional.
But I have said that.
Welcome back. If you are just joining us, it's Daybreak on Trust Television, and we are on to the review of the stories that made the front page. And of course, as earlier introduced, we have Kunle with us in the studio. I was talking about the budget passage yesterday. You recall that at some point in in our recent history, the president declined signing the budgets because, by his estimation, extraneous variables were introduced. Today, we are seeing an increase of 1.3 trillion above what the president had proposed. What do you make of what is coming out of the National Assembly?
Well, I find it interesting that at every given point in time, when the president presents a budget proposal to the National Assembly, yes, we are trying to meet up with the deadline. We are trying to ensure that we pass through the January to December budget cycle, which has always been the plan of the president, because we've seen in subsequent years how a budget is presented to the National Assembly, and it takes a lot of time, probably because of the wranglings between the executive and the legislature before we have the budget passed. And you know, when you don't have a timely implementation of the budget, you can see what that does to especially the execution of some critical projects that need to be handled by the federal government. But I saw this story yesterday, and I said, do we have a case where the National Assembly in itself is either helping us as a country, or they are responsible for the problems that we often find ourselves in? Because like you rightly pointed out, this is not the first time. Sometime even the previous budget as well, you made reference to that. The president presented a certain amount. There was a time we had a 10 trillion naira budget that was proposed to the National Assembly. By the time the National Assembly will pass the budget, we saw a figure of about 11 trillion naira that was approved by the National Assembly. And the president made, like which you made reference to, the president said himself that what was passed by the National Assembly was not what was presented by the National Assembly. And it gave rooms for a lot of people raised eyebrows as to whether or not some figures were rightly inserted, or there was the issue of budget padding, which has also become another nomenclature where our budgeting figure is concerned, whether some lawmakers have inserted certain figures for whatsoever reason or the other, or there are certain exigencies that have warranted that the National Assembly approves, because of course we know that they have the role of checkmating the activities of the executive, but you also are they come under the guise of, oh, we have the powers of appropriation. But when you are talking about the powers of appropriation, your powers of appropriation, does it mean that when the president has given consent to a certain figure that he feels that yes, the executive can work within the time frame, should they be? I remember during this happened at the time, this controversy of powers of appropriation of the National Assembly, whether they have the powers to appropriate or not. It started during the time of Abdulmumin Jibril back there, who raised the alarm, and we saw the controversy. And the question is, since that controversy of budget padding, whether you can appropriate certain figures as against what the president has presented, the question is, should you continue to appropriate? Now, what has been done since, because it appeared at a point in time the president was he hesitated to give his final assent to a certain budget when he realized that, look, what we presented to you and what has been approved they are not the same figures. Is there a reason? But because there was a time frame at which the administration needed to get the budget ongoing and for full implementation, the president had no choice than to ensure that budget was passed, even though the president clearly said it, that he had reservations as to why these budgetary provisions and allocations were increased by the legislature. Because it's not just about increment. Some people will say, oh, they have done their job, which is appropriation. But there is more to it than just the issue of appropriation.
Absolutely.
Because when you talk about, we went from 10 trillion to 11 trillion at some point in time. And the question was, then, looking at the revenue challenge that we had as a country, some people will say, oh, we don't have a debt challenge, no, it's a revenue challenge. But I think it's a case of both. Because when you talk about both the debt challenge, there is a reason why you are borrowing. The reason why you are borrowing is because you do not have the revenue to be able to meet up to whatever your plans and your proposed figures of what you want to achieve with your budget is, as far as your budgeting preparation is concerned.
Now, talking about debt, now it seems like with this increase, our debt profile is projected to be about 70 trillion. Isn't that too huge for us?
I mean, it's too much for us as a country, but then do they see that it's huge for us, especially when the government has over time told us that, look, we don't have a debt problem. And I wonder how we don't have a debt problem when you look at our debt profile currently at about 40 trillion, thereabouts, if I'm not mistaken. Now, just oppose that 40 trillion to the current projection, which says that by the end of the administration, we are talking about an expected debt profile of 70 trillion naira, as against where we were coming from, where we had this huge debt burden, and we were able to get debt relief. Now, the question is, the same way we were able to get such debt relief, do we have a plan, a follow-through plan that says that, look, this will not be a burden to us. We can actually get some of these agencies and some of these international organizations to help us reduce our debt profile? Because the truth is, if we have not been able to look for ways to internally generate revenue to fund this budget, then by the time we borrow here and there, and that is why there is the controversy of the ways and means that we are seeing over the CBN loan that the government is also being asked that they want to restructure. There is a reason why that loan exists as advance in terms of money that you are expecting to come in, and the money has not come in, and the money has been provided for. And there is a reason why you can even take that money in the first place for emergency purposes, not just the fact that you know the money is available and you just want to take it as you wish. There is a reason why. And I will expect that it's not just about the Senate saying, oh, you have already spent this money. Can we now, as an oversight body, which is the legislative arm, now get details? It's not just coming to tell us, oh, you want to restructure the loan. There were purposes for which the loan was set aside. If you have taken these loans, what was the reason for taking the loans? Were there appropriate approval for you taking those loans from the CBN? And then what have you used those loans for? Because we have a situation where accountability seems to be a problem with us, where government and governance is concerned. People just take funds, people allocate public funds, and certain expenditures at which these funds have been spent, we cannot account for it.
That's right. Talking about accountability, quite a number of things that we need to look at, because these are very sensitive issues. Zainab talked about 70 trillion. I think it's important to put on record here that the ways and means is not even added to our debt profile already. I mean, 24 trillion, if you add that to whatever exists, that's huge. That is about the size of our national budget, that aside. My worry is in increasing this size, budgets, the civil society organization that primarily police the Nigerian budget, came out to say last year, we inserted extra projects, not just raising the value of budgetary provision, but extra projects worth about $1 trillion. And we have done that this year. And so you said something that was important. How do we interpret the rules of appropriation? Is it in introducing extraneous variables to what has been proposed, or in evaluating whether the amount assigned is appropriate or under or below what can finance those projects? Because I remember the Vice President said they will approach the Supreme Court to challenge the interpretation of that appropriation. What exactly is right? Isn't this just the introduction of wastages to national budgeting cycle?
I mean, you have clearly stated it, because in the first place, when you have a 20 trillion naira budget, the question becomes, do we have the resources to fund that 20 trillion naira budget, for instance? And what has the level of implementation be? Even because, yes, we understand that the economic realities on ground right now, I mean, there is inflation. So you understand that whatever figures we usually have before for certain projects, particularly, which is the good side of this budget, it's not all criticism. I mean, we know that there are capital projects that need to be completed, as against in the past, where we had so much huge allocations going to salaries and the likes of them. But there are capital projects that actually need to be completed by the administration. And we know that there is inflation right now. So, but the question is, yes, how much of that inflation has really affected government that warrants the legislature to taking advantage of the situation of increasing our budget? Don't forget that why there are also reservations is the fact that there is also election year coming up. So are you telling me that by the time you approve the funds now, for instance, and we don't have all the resources, what is left for the incoming administration? This government barely has a lifespan of 5 months. And out of that 5 months, I think, if we are going to be sincere with ourselves, for the first 2 months, I don't know how much of governance we are going to see. For the last 3 months, yes, we would see, but I mean, to what extent? So the question is, it's not just about always increasing and say, oh, because of inflation. Now, do we have the funds to be able to actually make the revenue to be able to ensure that these funds are available? And at the end of the day, what will be the level of implementation? Because just yesterday as well, I mean, 3 days to the end of the year, you are approving supplementary budget. Monies that you could have as well inserted into the next year's budget. Because I'm wondering, we already have public holiday. We know that it's a working week for some people, but there is also the holiday season. Now, what kind of projects are we still embarking on that warrants the National Assembly passing supplementary budget 3 days to the administration? Are we saying that we want to exhaust all of the funds that we have for the 2022 budget before we start thinking of spending monies for 2023 budget? And then how do all these figures begin to add up?
Yeah, just to provide context before Z takes over, we understand that the bulk of that money will be borrowed. And there are also explanations that they've extended the life cycle of the capital project to March. Maybe that is the window where they will be spending that. But I leave that to Z to take on.
Well, I would say that this is a topic that we're going to spend donkey's years discussing. And there are other also very important issues on our dailies this morning, like this one about the EFCC auction 160 houses, lands worth billions of naira. Some will say, well, it seems that there's a form of transparency, the EFCC, in the EFCC, and now they're auctioning this, in the public space and all of that. And experts are also saying that the decision is timely, but they should ensure due process. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I think it's a very good move, and I hope that Nigerians like you and I in the studio will also have opportunity to bid on some of those. So, because I don't know how many of those houses and how many of those cars that you have Nigerians have. Well, I mean, it's good. I mean, I know just last week we saw Lagosians, for instance, going to some of the offices where some of the items and properties were being auctioned. And you talked about transparency in that report. Why are these properties being auctioned? These properties are being auctioned as a result of monies and properties that were acquired illegally by public officials who are supposed to look even into the interest of. I hope you know that some of these properties that there are some that have been discovered previously before now. There are some that are discovered under this administration. A clear case of the Accountant General, who was caught with how many properties, for instance. And you ask yourself how lucrative that position of an Accountant General is, for instance, that Marantin, because I know we all know the jobs of accountants. They are to issue receipts and the likes of them. So when you have accountants acquiring, if you're going to talk about their pay, their income, what they are supposed to generate, we all know, yes, it could also be a lucrative job, but if done the right way, but especially when you have a situation where people acquire properties illegally and to the detriment of the masses. In fact, it is so sad. I'm sure in Abuja, even within your environment, you will see that they acquire these properties to the extent that some of these properties are abandoned properties. You have uncompleted buildings and the likes of them. Why? Because sometimes you are under investigation. You cannot justify the source and the means at which some of these monies have come from. And I hope that it's not just about acquiring these properties, because you said something while you were taking the details of the headlines, talking about the fact that we hope that due process is being followed. What is the process of auctioning some of these properties? Right. The question is also at what cost? Even though when you also auction properties, you want to ensure that, like it's done in the Western world, that there is a bidding process. People who can afford these properties, you don't also want to undervalue, because a lot was taken out of the public quarters and you need to refund this money. So you want to ensure that this money, the value at which you are selling some of these items, you can at least, if you don't even recover all, because I don't know what our recovery process is like. I don't know how successful we have been, even though we know that certain items have been recovered, certain monies have been recovered. But you want a situation where even if you cannot recover all, can we say the EFCC should be able to recover at least about 50 to 70% of what was looted by these individuals? And for me, it's not just about people getting access. Because these properties, beyond people acquiring them, it must be seen that these properties are being used for something good. Not that they are abandoned properties where people you cannot even see the life of some of these buildings anymore. You cannot see the vehicles of some of these buildings, the vehicles, you cannot see the usefulness of them anymore. They must be useful to the society. But beyond just auctioning, can we also go further to say, who are the individuals that are the owners of these properties? Where are they? what is happening to prosecuting them? Because these things happen here. Some people do it to the extent that they know that when they are being questioned and when it gets to a plea bargain situation, you can always say, okay, I will release some of these properties for you, and they are allowed to go scot-free. We must set examples. We must show that, look, it's not just beyond the EFCC going after the properties, for instance. We are also going after the individuals, because the likes of an Alice in Madwika, I don't know how many of those properties she would have right now. If she's probably not going to be one of the top ranking on the list among those that have illegally acquired property, and she's still on the run till today. So the question is, what is the follow-through process of the law with regards to punishment? We need to show people that it's not just about recovering these properties, vehicles and the buildings. Yes, that's just one aspect of it. But can we go to prosecution of those that are found wanting? Because we have to be transparent, we have to be accountable. Who are the people that took this the funds? Why were they able to acquire these properties illegally? And then what type of message are we sending that, look, you don't, because you cannot just go into government, dip your hands into public funds, and there is no punishment whatsoever that comes with it. Beyond the forfeitures, we must see the punishment that comes with it, and we must also ensure that Nigerians we are able to account every money, like you rightly said, because we also have another part of transparency is all of the monies that are gotten from the proceeds of this item. Can we account for it? And probably this issue of the loans that we have been talking about, that we have been borrowing, will it also help? Can the EFCC also help the government by providing these monies to them and saying that, look, we have recovered some of these monies, as against putting us and probably leaving generations yet unborn indebted to funds that they know nothing about? Let's also contribute it and say, these critical areas where government needs assistance, we can also give you these funds as what we have recovered from proceeds of corruption.
Interesting. I recall that in the recent briefings of the Attorney General, he did state that some of the funds that were recovered, including the reluted funds, have been invested, if you like, or injected into the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, the Abuja-Kaduna-Kano Expressway, as well as the second Niger Bridge. Well, there is also the arguments by some experts that usually these funds were stolen. If they return before you apply them to project, it should be appropriated. So if they were appropriated, we will know how much we had put in and how much came in from external sources. But that will be arguments for another day. We take on another story. There seem to have been so many killings within the festive period. We took the one of, in earlier reports, the fella who was killed while jogging around his estate. Today, Daily Trust is reporting that bandits killed 14, adopt 81 in Sokoto and Katsina. Leadership is reporting that gunmen bombed police headquarters in Anambra, 3 suspects. At the same time, the IGP is ordering that the policeman who shot the lawyer lady returning from Christmas season be investigated. There appear to be too many killings going on. When would we be able to put our, I'm talking about the security forces now, be able to put, their arsenals into proper use, by curtailing this number of killing? Life is becoming very cheap in Nigeria, if you like. What's your take on all of this?
It's a sad and unfortunate situation, but you said the first question you have raised is what is the value of human life in Nigeria as of today? You said something which I want to take a cue from. Where do we begin to deploy our resources to where it really matters the most? Because I want to start from the unfortunate killing of the Lagos lawyer, for instance. We still do not have the details. But for whatsoever reason, an innocent lady who was spending the festive period with the family killed in the manner at which she was killed, and you have criminal elements that are parading themselves, causing havoc in the society, and it baffles me that you are quick to act against people who do not commit an offense. But there are people that have been committing offenses day out, and it appears that the same full wrath of the law that should go against those criminal elements, we are not deploying them. I read the case of the Ebonyi state governor yesterday, who was giving criminals 24 hours to drop their weapons. I mean, does a state, when you look at the kind of crimes that have been committed, the nature of the crimes, do you need such order? The same way the president ordered shoot on sight against criminal elements. And you can see what is happening. I mean, the Southeast, they are not even faring any better for it. I'm sure you notice that a lot of people have to spend the festive period in Abuja, which is very unusual. Why? Because some people cannot travel. They cannot travel home to see their families as a result of how serious the insecurity situation is over there. You talked about Anambra. We have seen attacks in Ebonyi. We have seen attacks in Imo. And it begs to raise the question as to whether our security agencies are helpless. Or they choose to be helpless in certain situations, and then they go all out in certain situations where you necessarily do not need to see them use force. And for the Lagos lawyer, we heard the IG of police ordering. I mean, does the IG even need to give that order for someone carried out an unlawful act? That's a criminal activity, unfortunately, from someone who is supposed to be enforcing the law. So we have criminals on one hand, and we have people who are supposed to be enforcing the law also engaging in the criminal activities. So who is going to actually stop these criminals in their tracks? Because this issue of insecurity is troubling. And more troubling in the sense that you need to look at the fact that we are entering more sensitive times. Right. We are just approaching the end of the year. And in about 59 days thereabout, the country is preparing for general elections. And beyond the height of the ordinary civilians, how they have been affected by this, the trauma that some of them have had to go through. The question is, I listened to the commissioner of the first PRO who was giving assurances about the safety of our elections. And I'm wondering, with this height of insecurity that we have not been able to curtail in some of the parts of the country, not just the Southeast, we have Zamfara too, we have Katsina, we have Sokoto. I mean, with this height, can we go into elections with our full chest and say that, look, the environment will be secure, and looking at how volatile elections are also in Nigeria? So there is a lot that is around this issue of insecurity in Nigeria today. And the truth is, the security agencies cannot afford to fold their hands right now. We have talked about the fact that if it means deploying a lot of people into these areas that have been largely affected, unfortunately, the problem that some of us have, and also being on the field, having to cover some of these incidents, is that, look, we have a situation where our security agencies have always been reactive rather than proactive. What has always been the place of intelligence in preventing some of these attacks? Why is it that criminal elements are, and we call them non-state actors, allowed to have their way, and they just jump in, come carry out their attacks, and we even have a tag for them, unknown gunmen. These unknown gunmen, do they not have identities? These unknown gunmen, are they ghosts? Do they not stay in communities as well? So what will it cost us for our security agencies to go into these places where you feel that these criminal elements operate, and then you try to fish them out, and you nip some of their attacks in the bud before it happens? And we have secret police, for instance. What is the job of the secret police? Unfortunately, some of our security agencies have been reduced to issues that are not even within their purview, when they have more pressing issues that they need to be focusing on, which unfortunately they do not spend much time addressing.
Can we say perhaps they're overstretched? That's why we're having...
Now, if they were really doing their work in the first place, we will say they are overstretched. But how much of their work are they doing that really shows that they are overstretched? Because we need to look at overstretched in what terms. Are they deployed to areas where they should not be? Are they deployed into places where they do not have the manpower? If it's by the manpower, then why are we not recruiting more people into the police force? And then what is the environment, even within the security agencies, for instance, that wants to encourage people to say, because look, in the US, you see how many, in Western countries, the US, the UK, you see how many security agencies have been deployed. And I ask myself, do we even have the population to match the population of security force that matches our manpower when it comes to policing? I shake my head when we hear over 300,000 policemen in a country. In fact, did I say over 300,000? We have over 200,000 policemen policing a country of 2 million, over 200 million people. And when it is time for election, out of that 200,000 policemen, in a state, we can deploy 30,000. to deploy one state, and we have 36 states. If we are deploying 30,000 policemen to one state for election and over 200 million people, which means we now have, and look, we need to also look at the population of the people in that state, which means we now have 170,000 left policing. That mass alone in itself does not add up.
Interesting. I will just get your quick take on the 30 seconds. The trading of words between ASU and Gbajabia Miller over what appears to be what they call a deception to get them to call off the 8 months long strike and the written commitments that they are not keeping to. What do you make of the claims and counterclaims?
Well, I think you do not fault ASU at this point in time, because over time people have faulted ASU, the long strike, unending. I mean, at what point in time could they sheath their sword and say that, look, let's come to the table? And that was what the lawmakers achieved, led by the speaker. But when you hear recent pronouncements by the Minister of Labor and Employment talking about Chris Ngige, I don't think his comments of recent times have been helping matters at all. At a point in time where you would have expected this whole situation had been subsided, and he comes and he says that, look, they may forfeit their pensions for the period of the 8 months and their wages that they were on strike. I mean, you do not expect them to keep quiet, because they are already they're still hot from the fact that you have to take them to court and you have to compel them. And even after compelling them, the truth is, how much of good faith have we seen on the part of government to say that, look, yes, we made certain promises, and some of those promises were premised on the fact that you have to go back to the classroom first, and then we'll meet up. But having gone back to the classroom, has the government met with its demand? What, on the part of the leadership of this speaker, what was promised to them? Because they will hold on to it. We saw, I mean, the strike lasted for 8 months. I hope this is not another warning sign that coming back into the new year, they may resort back to that, because it will not be in the interest. We already have our education system that has been affected, that has taken several steps backward. What will it cost us? And I hope we increased our budget to 21 trillion. I hope, like the president said at some point in time, that more monies have been approved for ASU, that it is going to be reflected, because government must also show good faith. You cannot encourage someone to go to work and what the person needs to be well taken care of, you are not making provisions for the person.
Absolutely. I wish we had all the time in the world to look at this, but I can assure you that on a different day we'll be extracting all the issues with regards to what was promised in all of that conversation between the House of Reps and members of ASU, and what needs to be done, like you rightly identified, to keep our classrooms open, especially at this critical time, having lost 2 academic sessions in what appears to be a series of strike. We have been talking with Kunle Adeni, a public commentator, and I'm sure you have enjoyed every bit of the insight that he had brought to the table with regards to looking at the issues, the major issues that made the front pages of the newspaper this morning. It's a pleasure to have had you join us this morning, and we hope that when we call again, you will find time to join us.
I'll make myself available.
Thank you very much. We'll take a short breather at this point. When we return at the top of the hour, the show continues. Please stay with us.
But in a situation where you find that they look like the same,
Not necessarily tribal or regional.
I have said that